And with that potential government shutdown looming, we could see a big impact on local business and industry here in central Louisiana. Alina Noakes has more.
As time runs out on reaching an agreement to avoid a government shutdown, millions of Americans are bracing for its impacts, with the first hit potentially coming to those who receive financial support.
The vast majority of WIC participants would see an immediate reduction and elimination of those benefits.
Michelle Pearl, CEO of the nonprofit United Way of Central Louisiana, says resources will be stretched thin.
All of our nonprofits that provide those essential services such as rent, utility, and food, they are going to be the hardest hit and are going to anticipate a larger influx of clients.
And of course, federal workers like those at Fort Johnson or Pollux Federal Corrections Facility or even TSA at Alexandria International Airport will be required to go to work and for a time leave without a paycheck.
The TSA is going to continue to come to work, do their job. They're considered essential employees, as well as air traffic controllers.
Director of England Air Park, Ralph Hennessy, expects it to be business as usual at the airport. So travel in the upcoming busy holiday months should be okay, unless workers protest the shutdown.
Hopefully they won't have a work stoppage or a sick out, and they'll continue to honor their agreement with the government to come to work, even though the government's not honoring their agreement to keep them funded and paid. Time will tell.
Deborah Randolph, president of the Central Louisiana Regional Chamber of Commerce, hopes none of these scenarios have a chance to play out. The chamber is urging Louisiana's congressional delegation to agree to a measure that would prevent a shutdown.
The government shutdown is certainly not the answer. And that there needs to be, in looking at spending reductions overall and to address the budget deficit, that those need to be ongoing negotiations that are not punted to the very last minute because of the impact on real people and real businesses throughout the country of a government shutdown.
Congress has until October 1st to reach an agreement. For News Channel 5, I'm Alina Noakes.